This video is going to cover practice day 4 for chapter 0 of geometry. Okay, if you notice on your practice sheet, the first 4 problems are review from last time. Okay, it's solving quadratics using the square root method and the quadratic formula. Okay, so we're not going to spend a lot of time on these. I hope that it comes back from last time. When we are using the square root method, it's because there's a single x that is missing here. Okay, what we're going to do is make sure that the squared term is by itself. In this case, it already is. To get rid of the square, we take the square root on both sides. X equals, we know the square root of 64 is 8, but it is also a negative 8. Negative 8 times negative 8 is 64. Okay, the next one, we got an extra step in here. To get the squared by itself, we're subtracting by 7, and that gives us 81. Now we can do just like the first problem, take the square root of both sides, and x equals 9 and negative 9. Okay, one more step on number 3. We have to subtract 5 over, and we get an 18 there, but we also need to then divide by 2. So x squared equals 9, square root of both sides, x equals 3 and negative 3. Okay. Number 4 is the quadratic formula. This one was a little bit tougher to work with, but we've got all these pieces, A, B, and C. Okay, in order to do that, and identify the A, B, C, we first need to make sure it's in the right form. Okay, we need our equation to look like ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. Okay, and that's a problem for this first one because there's no 0 over here. Okay, we need this 35 to the other side, so we'll subtract. And then go find our A, our B, and our C. Okay, our A is in front of the squared term, 6. B is in front of the single x, 11. And C is the one all by itself, the negative 35. Okay, to fill in our formula, we're going to start a little bit down towards the middle so we can simplify working upwards. Okay, then we're taking the opposite of B, so negative 11. Then our plus or minus and a big square root symbol. Okay, remember last time, B squared is always positive. Okay, so if you have to use your calculator to square that, make sure whatever number that comes out of it is positive. If not, you forgot your parentheses around the square. Okay, in this case, we've got 11 squared, that's 121. Minus 4. A here is 6. And then C is negative 35. And then we're dividing by 2 times our A, which was 6. Okay? Draw your square root symbol again, and then remember, we're typing in our calculator just what we see underneath the radical, not the symbol itself. Okay, so 121 minus 4 times 6 times negative 35. Go get that typed in. You should get 961. Okay, we don't know if that's a perfect square, okay, because it's larger than the perfect squares that we know. So you have to test it here. Okay, and as you'll see, I've already got here the square root of 961. It is a perfect square, that's 31. Okay, so this all simplifies to just the number 31. Okay, now we need to talk about our 2 answers. We've got 2 different equations for this symbol right here. We've got the plus and the minus, so we're going to take care of both. First off, the negative 11 is going to go. Then the plus 31 divided by 2 times 6, which is 12. Negative 11 stays again, but this time it's minus 31 divided by 12. Okay, then we're going to simplify both of these here. We've got a 20 over 12 4 goes into each of those, so that simplifies to 5 over 3. On the second one, we've got negative 42 over 12. And a 6 goes into both of those. Goes in 7 times up top, so negative 7, and then goes twice in the bottom. So we've got two answers, 5/3 and negative 7/2. Okay, remember guys, we like fractions better here because we can see they're exact. If you're going to have a decimal, make sure you don't round there. Okay, so now we're going to focus on factoring. Okay, in order to factor, we have to look at the number's factors, okay? And not just any number, but the C. Okay, so we're going to look at the factors of the C term. Okay, and then last time we talked about that add to B. Now, we're going to talk about this word add here when we get to some of these problems here in a minute. Okay, but for right now, we're starting out by just identifying what our C is. Okay, in this first equation, our C is the 3, and we want to look at the factors of 3. Okay, so in our tree here, we've only got 2 factors, 1 times 3. Okay, good news for us, that adds to be 4. Okay, but if you notice, we've got a negative sign here too. Okay, this is a positive 3, and that means 2 things for us. Okay, a positive, make yourself a note, means we're looking for the same sign and the sum. Okay, same sign means our factors have to have the same sign. They're either going to be both positive or both negative, because a positive 1 times a positive 3 is a positive 3, and a negative 1 times a negative 3 is a positive 3. Okay, so that's going to mean we have to use the same sign, whether it be positive or negative. But it also means we're looking for a sum. That means the two numbers have to add up to be this 4. Okay, add up. And in this case, we're looking at a negative. That tells us that I don't want the 2 positive ones, I want the 2 negative ones. Okay, so x and x go in my first one because x times x is x squared, and then those 2 factors go in my second slot, so -1, -3, in whatever order you want. It's okay if you switch those around. Okay, now this is a product. We're multiplying these 2 things together, and we get 0. The only way that's going to happen is if one of these parentheses is equal to 0. Okay, because we can say 0 times some number is 0, or some number times 0 is 0. If that's the case, we need to look at either of these. Okay, we need to say, well, let's see what happens if x minus 1 is 0, and let's see what happens when x minus 3 is 0. Okay, to solve this for x, we just add 1, so x equals 1. We're going to add 3 over here, x equals 3. So I've got 2 solutions, 1 and 3. And if you notice, from our factor form up here, all that's happened is the signs switched. Okay, and that's going to work every time for our easy factoring. Okay, so let's try another one here. We're looking at the factors of 4, the positive mean, same sign and sum. Okay, so we need both positive or both negative. Okay, the factors of 4 are 1 and 4, or 2 and 2. The positive also says we're looking for a sum of 5, so that gives us the first option, our 1 and 4. Okay, they have a sum of 5, but they also have this negative here. That tells us we need both negatives. So this time our variable is y. We're putting a y in the first 2 slots, and then our 2 factors, -1, -4, equal to 0. 2 solutions then, if we remember from over here, we just switch the sign, so that becomes a positive 1 and a positive 4. Okay. On this next one, Okay, we have 9. Go ahead and pause the video for me if you would, and see if you can write this in factored form. Alright, 9, we've got the options of 1 and 9, or 3 and 3. In this case, we're looking for a sum of 10. 1 and 9 is going to do it for us. And in this case, it's positive, so we need both positive here. So, m plus 1, m plus 9 equals 0. That makes our two solutions, -1 and -9. Alright, these next couple are different because they are not set equal to 0. Okay, for easy factoring, the reason these work, if you remember from last time, is because the a value is always 1. Now, if you look at number 8 here, if we were to subtract and move over that x squared, it becomes a negative x squared. Well, that a is not 1, it would be -1. Okay, so that does not work for us. Your squared term, whatever your a is, has to be positive. Okay, because of that, we have to move both of these other things over to the left-hand side. Okay, so x squared minus x minus 2 equals 0. Now, this is the first time we've seen a negative factor. Okay, make yourself a note. Minus is going to mean two things for us. Okay, it's going to mean we have different signs, and we're looking for a difference, meaning we're subtracting them instead of adding them. We're not looking for a sum, we're looking for a difference, and they're different signs. Okay, so we're looking at the factors of just regular 2 to start out with, and all they are 1 and 2. Okay, but we have to get a -2, and the only way to do that by multiplying is if 1 is positive and 1 is negative. Okay, so that's why we have different signs. Okay, we're looking for a difference of the middle term here. Okay, in this case, you can't see it, but that's really a 1. If you notice, 2 and 1 have a difference of 1, so those work out. Okay, so we're starting with x and x again. And then I've got a 1 and a 2, but I have to decide what the signs are. I said they're opposite each other, they're different, but I don't know which one's the positive and which one's the negative. Okay, we're going to look again at that middle term. That middle term sign will always go with the larger number. So in this case, it's negative. That's going to go with the larger number 2, which means the 1 gets the plus. So x equals opposite -1, opposite +2. Okay, for the next one, we've got x squared minus 4x, subtract that 5 over. So we're looking at the factors of 5. Since it's a -5, we know they're going to be different signs, and we're looking for a difference of 4. Well, 1 and 5 do have a difference of 4. Okay, and I need a -4. Okay, so the middle term is going with my larger number, that sign. Okay, so the negative goes with the 5, which means the 1 gets the positive. So my two groups equal to 0, and I've got x plus 1 and x minus 5. So then our solutions, opposite -1, opposite +5. Okay, last one of this type here. I want you to pause the video and see if you can decide what you need to do for number 10. Looking at 36, we've got the factors 1, 36, 2, 18, 3, 12, 4, 9, 6, and 6. Okay, the ones that work for us to get to 12, okay, are 6 and 6. Okay, because this is a positive 36, I knew I was looking for a sum, the ones that added to be 12. Okay, so now we have to determine the sign. We know it's going to be the same sign since it's a sum. X and X, 6 and 6. But we have to decide, are they both positive or are they both negative? In this case, take a look at the middle term, gives you your answer. Both of them are going to be negative. So X equals, switch the sign, 6 and 6. Okay, notice that this is the same number. Okay, if you want, you don't have to write it twice. Okay, it's the same answer here. There's only one. Alright, so the hard way is when our A is not equal to 1. Okay, this is going to make our job a little bit tougher. Okay, because before, we needed our first terms. This x times this x got us to x squared. Okay, so I need my first terms to multiply together to be 8. Okay, so it's a lot of work here. What we're going to do is follow this process. Okay, we're going to take the same idea, but we're looking at the factors, instead of just at C, we're looking at the factors of A times C that add to B. Okay, so A times C is 8 times negative 3. Okay, this negative 24 means I'm looking for a difference of 2. Okay, so my factors need to have a difference of 2. So I've got 1, 24, that one doesn't work. 2 and 12, that one doesn't work. 3 and 8, still no. 4 and 6. Notice 4 and 6 have a difference of 2. Okay, but we also need different signs. So the sign of the middle term goes with the bigger number. So the positive goes with the bigger number. That means the 4 gets the negative. Alright, here's another thing that's different. We can't start out with x and x like we did the last time. We're going to have to start out by rewriting the equation, 8x squared. But instead of writing this 2x, we're going to write it in terms of our factors. We're going to say minus 4 tack on an x plus 6 tack on an x. Because 6 minus 4 is 2. It's the same thing, just expanded out. Then we're going to bring down the rest of the equation. Minus 3 equals 0. Okay, it looks like we made it harder, okay, but what's nice here is we can split this thing in half. Okay, if we split it right before the sign, okay, for that third term there, we have two different groups that we can factor separately here. Okay, so if I'm looking over here, you'll notice that I've got an 8 and a 4. Those share the number 4, so I'm going to factor it out. Okay, but also both of these terms have an x in it, so I want to pull that out as well. So I took an 4 and an x out of this 8x squared. 8 divided by 4 is 2. X squared divided by x just leaves 1x. And then I took negative 4 divided by 4, negative 1. X divided by x is still 1. Those ones cancel out. Okay, then we're closing it. We're going to do the same thing to the other side here, but our first step is just to drag down this plus. Now decide, is there anything in common with your 6x and your 3? Okay, and there's a 3 in common. Okay, 3 goes into 6 2 times. The x just has to come down for the ride, and then negative 3 divided by 3 is negative 1. If you'll notice, we've got something happening over here. Both of my parentheses look exactly the same, and they have to. Okay, so we're going to rewrite that set of parentheses. Okay, but factored form looks like two sets. So our other group is going to be everything on the outside. So 4x plus 3. And now you'll see our 2x times our 4x does get us to that 8x squared like we wanted to. Okay, so this is factored form for our quadratic that has a term, an a term that is not 1. Alright, so our process stays the same here. Okay, we just can't take the opposite of our negative 1 here and the opposite of our 3 because we've got other numbers happening. Okay, so let's go ahead and set both of these equal to 0 like we did for the first problem. 2x minus 1 equals 0 and 4x plus 3 equals 0. And then solve them both separately. On this first one, we're adding 1. And then 2x equals 1. Divide by 2, divide by 2. X equals 1/2. Over here, we're subtracting 3. And 4x equals negative 3. Divide by 4. So x equals negative 3/4. Two solutions here. Okay, we're going to have x equals 1/2 and negative 3/4. When you are hard factoring, every single time, at least one of these is going to have a fraction in it. Okay, one of them might turn out nice to be a whole number, but at least one of them has to be a fraction when you're hard factoring. Okay, so don't be surprised when those show up. Alright, let's look at the next one. Again, we're taking a times c first, so negative 15. It's a minus, so we're looking for a difference of 2. Okay, notice I'm ignoring this sign for right now. That's going to help us. So difference of 2. 1 and 15, 3 and 5, and those are our only options. Of these, the 3 and the 5 have the difference of 2. Okay, we need to have different signs. One gets a positive, one gets a negative. This sign of the middle term goes with the bigger number always. So the negative goes with our 5. Okay, if you remember, our next step is just to rewrite it. We're taking 3n squared plus 3n minus 5n minus 5 equals 0. Okay, this goes in the place of your negative 2n because 3 minus 5 is negative 2. Okay, it's equivalent. Then we're going to split it in half and factor each side. Okay, this looks nice because you'll see there's a 3 in both of them and there's an n in both of them, so we take it both out. 3n. So 3n squared divided by 3n, there's just one extra n here, so that's left. And then 3n divided by 3n is 1. Next is always drag down this sign. Okay, so now we're looking at the 5n and the 5. The 5 is in common. Okay, notice it's really dividing by a negative 5. Okay, so we're taking negative 5n divided by negative 5. Okay, negative divided by a negative is positive, and there's an extra n, so it's positive n. And then we've got a negative 5 divided by a negative 5, and that's a positive 1. Okay, again, our parentheses match up. They have to. Okay, if they don't, you did something wrong. Go check up here again. Okay, a lot of times this sign causes some problems. Okay, but that's our first one. Our second one is everything on the outside, so 3n minus 5. Okay, so we're setting these equal. If you notice here, we've got just an n plus 1. So I know my first solution is just negative 1, the opposite of that. Okay, this one we have to set equal to 0. 3n minus 5 equals 0. Add 5. And then divide by 3. So 5/3. Okay, so let's look at a pattern here to see if there's a shortcut for writing these solutions. When we had just a single n, we just took the opposite of here. Okay, that's because the opposite is subtracting over the 1 when we had the equation n plus 1 equals 0. We subtracted over the 1 or took the opposite. Here, we have two steps. Okay, we're taking the opposite, we added it over, and then we divided by the number in front. Okay, so if we want to quickly solve, all we have to do is take the opposite still, but then divide by the number in front. Okay, so if we go back over here, the opposite of 3 is negative 3 divided by 4. If you look down here, we had negative 3 over 4. Here, the opposite of negative 1 is positive 1 divided by 2 is 1/2, and that's where our two answers came from. I want you to pause the video and see if you can try number 13. If we take 2 times -7, we get -14. So we're looking for a difference of 13. Well, that works with 1 and 14. Our signs are opposite. The negative goes with the larger number, positive with the 1. And then we get to rewrite 2d squared plus 1d minus 14d minus 7 equals 0. Okay? If we're looking at this first half, we've got a d in common, and then a d is left, but also this 2 didn't come out, so 2d plus 1. Bring down the sign negative, and there's a 7 in common there. It goes into 14 twice, that d comes down, and then a negative divided by a negative is a positive 1. Okay, so we're going to regroup now. The first set is 2d plus 1. Got rid of those. And on the outside, we've got d minus 7. So, opposite of 1 divided by 2, -1 divided by 2. Here, opposite of -7 is positive 7. And we've got our two solutions. Okay. Now, this one, if you can see, we've got a positive here. Okay, our first step stays the same, and we've got a positive 28. This time we're looking for a sum instead of a difference. Okay, so 1 and 28, that does give us a sum of 29. Okay, so 7x squared plus 1x plus 28x, and then plus 4 equals 0. Pause the video and see if you can factor each of these halves. Hopefully you got there was an x here, and then 7x plus 1. On this side, we have a 2 here that comes out of each, but also a 4. We want to factor out the biggest. If you only factor out a 2, we'll notice our parentheses don't match up here. Okay, so 7x then plus 1 equals 0. Okay, now they match up. Then we've got 7x plus 1 when we regroup times x plus 4 equals 0. So my two solutions are opposite of 1 divided by the number in front, opposite of 4. Alright, let's look at the next one. 3 times -3, -9. Find the factors that work for that -8 and see if you can solve this one from start to finish. -9 here means we're looking for a difference of 8. 1 and 9 work. Okay? We need the negative to go with the larger number. So I've got 3m squared plus 1m minus 9m minus 3 equals 0. Split it. M comes out. 3m plus 1. Remember, this negative has to come down, and this is going to be tricky for a lot of you. Okay? Because when we look at this, some things change. This first term is going to be positive. Okay? It always will be positive. So we've got 3m. But then we've got a negative divided by a negative, which makes it a positive 1. Okay? So be careful on your signs there. Of course, you can look over here to know what your parentheses should end up looking like. So we've got 3m plus 1, and then m minus 3. The two solutions are opposite of 1 divided by 3, opposite of -3. Alright, looking at our next one here. 16 times 1 is 16. And I'm looking for a sum, since it's positive, of 8. 1 and 16 don't work. 2 and 8 don't work. 4 and 4 do work. Okay, but it's negative 8. Remember, just like with easy factoring, this means the same sign. Since it needs to be negative, that means our signs both have to be negative here. Okay, so 16r squared minus 4r minus 4r plus 1 equals 0. If we split it, okay, we're looking at a 4 and an r that's in common with those first two. So when we take 16 divided by 4, we get a 4. And then r squared divided by r is r. Negative 4r divided by positive 4r is negative 1. Bring down the sign. Now if you notice over here, there's nothing in common with 4r and 1. When there's nothing in common, we're going to write a 1, because you can divide every single thing by 1 and get the same answer. Okay? So then, negative 4r divided by negative 1 is just a positive 4r. 1 divided by negative 1 is a negative 1. And then our parentheses match up. So 4r minus 1 and 4r minus 1. Okay, this is very similar to on the front page number, maybe it was on the back page. Okay, when we have two solutions of the same type, because if you notice, both of my parentheses are exactly the same. Okay, so we've got two of the same answers. Again, you can write them twice if you want, okay, but you don't have to, because r, either way, is the opposite of 1, or opposite of negative 1, excuse me, divided by this 4, which happens to be the same thing over here. Okay, so we've really got one solution here that's unique, okay, because the other one looks just like it. Okay, those last three are on you. Okay, if you have any questions, let me know. We are going to talk about this one here in a minute, okay, but I want you to pause the video and see if you can try at least 17, because hopefully you recognize what's special about it. This here you don't have to take a times c, because a is 1 here. This is easy factoring. We're going to have an x and an x equal to 0. We just have to decide what this means. We're looking at the factors of 16 that have a difference of 6. Okay, so here we've got 1 16. That doesn't work. 2 and 8. That one works. Okay, so 2 and 8, but we need the signs to be different, and the negative goes with the larger number. So I've got two solutions, negative 2 and positive 8. Alright, taking a look at number 18, it's different for a couple reasons here. Okay, we have to get everything to the left again, but we've done that. Okay, but there's one thing that's nice about this particular problem. Okay, if you notice, every single one of these terms share the same number. We want to factor that out. In fact, that should be the first thing we look for when we're seeing an equation that starts with an a value that is not 1. We want to look if any of those numbers, a, b, and c, share the same factor. If we go back and look at these previous ones, 16, 8, and 1, they don't share the same factor. 3, 8, and 3, they didn't share the same factor. 4, 29, and 7, they don't share the same factor. Okay, the same goes for the 3 previous ones. None of these shared anything in common. Okay, so we couldn't do anything. But this one, we can. Since there's a 4 in all of them, we're going to start by factoring it out. So 4x squared divided by 4 is x squared. 40 divided by 4 is 10. We've got minus 10. Then x. 44 divided by 4 is 11, minus 11. Now if you notice, this inside is easy factoring. Okay, we still have to keep the 4, but we know it's going to go into 2 sets of parentheses, and we know there's going to be an x in the first spot of both. So I just have to decide, what are the factors of 11 that give me a difference of 10? And that, of course, is 1 and 11 because you don't have any other options. Okay, so we've got 1 and 11, and then the signs are different. The negative goes with the larger number. Okay, sign of the middle term with the larger number. Now, when we're looking at this to solve it, we've got 3 pieces. Okay, normally we look at x plus 1 is 0 or x minus 11 is 0. Same thing goes here because 4 can't be 0. So this we kind of just ignore for the solutions. Okay, so we're taking the opposite of the other 2, negative 1, the opposite of negative 11, 11. Okay, so I want you to use that idea to think about that last problem here. So pause the video and see what you can figure out. Alright, so 8x squared minus 4x minus 24 equals 0. There's a 4 in common again. Then 2x squared minus 1x minus 6 equals 0. The only difference with this one is that's hard factoring now. Okay, that's our frowny face where we have to make that a times c. So we're going and looking at negative 12. And we need a difference of 1 here. So 12 and 1, 2 and 6, 3 and 4 are the ones that work for us. Okay, so we still have to start with this 4. And I'm going to have you change this to a bracket because remember, we got to split it into 4 different terms and then cut it in half. Okay, so we got a lot going on here. But we're going to drag down this 2x squared, but then we want to write this in terms of our negative 1 here. Remember, our signs have to be different, so the negative goes with our larger number. So plus 3x minus 4x, and then the rest, minus 6, equals 0 on the end. Now we can split it. Again, the 4 is just there. And then there's an x that we can factor out, so 2x plus 3. Over here, bring down the negative. They're both even, so we can factor out a 2. And then we get 2x plus 3 again. Okay, switch our sign here. And now we can regroup. I'm going to switch back to parentheses because I know it's going to group into 2 sets. And the 2 sets are our 2x plus 3. And then on the outside, x minus 2. Just like on this previous problem over here, this 4 doesn't do anything for our solutions. Okay, we have to have it on there for factored form, but it doesn't mean anything for our x. Okay, so we can ignore that and say x is opposite of 3 divided by 2. Opposite of negative 2. And those are our answers. Okay? If you have any questions on factoring, or if you struggle with hard factoring, frowny face factoring, come ask me questions. Okay? We can work together. The more you practice, the better you're going to get at it.